Hello, everyone. I feel like it's been a long time, but welcome to my very dark office in progress. Our furniture just showed up this week on a container and it was water damaged because there was a hole in the container and it's been on the ocean for almost 4 months. So things are getting pieced together. There's a crazy echo in here. I hope this video turns out okay. I feel completely out of practice, but I'm so excited to be sitting in community here with you. I hope you can access the video and that it will give you a few ideas of things that you can do with your students and things that you can do in general. So first of all, hi, I'm Pernille, coming to you live from Denmark, where I have been since August of this year. We are settling in well. It's hard. I'm not going to lie. It's hard moving countries, even though I moved home. For those of you who don't know, I was born and raised in Denmark and lived in the United States for 24 years, where I obviously was a teacher in the American public school system in Middleton, Wisconsin and Oregon, Wisconsin. Absolutely loved it. Did not think that I would ever leave teaching in the US, but this year we did, to come home with my American husband and my 4 Danish American kids. And while we are certainly settling in much more, it's just been filled with challenges. I was not able to find a teaching job, for example, when I moved here. It turns out the resume process and application process is super different. And it was interesting. I got some feedback from a guy I know, and he was kind of like, yeah, the people who you'd send your application to, they were wondering if you could even teach Danish children. I was like, okay. So super humbling, but I do hope to be back in the classroom at some point because I miss it. But until then, it's been super exciting to work in early childhood education and to see the incredible things that are happening there, especially in particular to play-based learning and just social justice with the younger students, and really thinking about the development that happens between 0 through 5 and what the framework needs to be for kids to really grow up being empathetic, action-driven young human beings, and also protecting the people who care for them. Because if you think that educators in general are mistreated man in early childhood, it's like crazy Wild West for sure. So that's been super fascinating, and just recognizing that even though like I'm sitting in Denmark, there's a lot of educational topics that ring true both in the US and in Europe, or Northern Europe where I am. I think about reading enjoyment, for example. There's a big push for that here in Denmark as well, although their structures are very, very different. And also just kind of like that, how do we engage students when tools such as their cell phones, which opens up a whole world of entertainment, is right by their hands? And like, how do we get them to be curious about the world while also protecting them just a little bit, because the world is still really heavy. It's been wild living in a country where COVID is seen now as the same way as a flu or as a cold. My husband and I have talked a lot about that. When people get sick here, they really don't even test to see if it's COVID. They just stay home. And there's even commercials running from the government saying, you know, you got any kind of sniffles, any kind of cough, just stay home. Like, nobody wants you at work. And that is truly how it is over here. So that's been really, really eye-opening. Being in a society that doesn't just pretend to care about work-life balance, but that is very focused on it. And so I've been speaking to American educators about it, of like, how do we bring some of those ideas into the American educational system? And while there are huge restructuring that needs to happen for it truly to happen, obviously, for example, one of the things that we've noticed with our own kids is that they have a lot less school time and they have a lot more free time. So their schedules are quite different than what I'm used to seeing in the US. So for example, when I taught elementary, we had the same schedule every day. The only thing that changed obviously was specials or electives, whether they went to art or music or PE. Well, here in Denmark, you don't have the same schedule. So you have the same schedule on Mondays, and then a different schedule on Tuesday, different schedule on Wednesday, and so on. You also don't have the same classes every single day. So for example, Danish, which is like your literacy class in America, your English class in America, just called Danish here, of course, like my youngest only has that 4 times a week. And they're different sections of the day because the teacher is utilized in different ways. So like their classroom teacher who's with them, she's actually been with the class since first grade, and this is her last year. So they go in 3-year chunks, which I think is so amazing. Can you imagine looping with the same kids for 3 years? It would be so incredible. If it's a good fit, right? Like if it's not a good fit, then it wouldn't be. But um, she teaches not just Danish, she teaches 3 other classes for the class as well. So kind of like similar to our elementary system where we taught a lot of different classes, but because it's not every day, she doesn't have as many front-facing hours. And so teachers teach less in Denmark, and their work week is only 37 hours, which is the typical full-time work week. I only work 37 hours. And even like the way, so like schedules, obviously, like in a perfect world, I wish we could blow up the schedule system of the US. So like my kids, their day starts at 8, and most days my 8 and 10-year-olds are home at 1:15 p.m. or that's when they're done. So they're home by 1:30 because they bike. So that means that they have a lot of time for activities and a lot of freedom. For kids 0 through 3rd grade, so K through 3, the school has a built-in care center that you can have them join if they can't be home by themselves, obviously, or if there's nobody home. It's very, very cheap to join. It's called SFO. And everybody can join. There's not like a limit on it, like how many kids. I know in the US we run into that a lot, or it's very expensive, or there's a wait list. So that's a huge thing, but that's also because like every school that has those classes has something like that. So it's not just certain schools. For kids in 4th grade and up, they're really expected to be able to go home and take care of themselves until their parents get home, or until their caregivers get home. And so they don't even have that. So there's no like after school care in that sense. So because most Danes, especially Danes with children, tend to work shorter days or tend to work flexible schedule, like this is a vast generalization, of course, kids are really not home that long by themselves. And so that's been really fascinating too in working with my own job. But things that you could transfer into the US are things such as there's a very hard line between when you're working and when you're not. And we were even told that by our kids as teachers. They have been very direct, which is the Danish way, which I love. It explains a lot of my personality, as far as saying like, this is when we're able to email, or when you can expect a reply. They only reply back within a certain time frame of the day. And if they don't get to you that day, they will. So it's not like they leave you hanging, but the same thing goes for meetings, that they're very kind of like, and this is the meeting time that we have built into our schedule. So this is when you're expected to come. Now, again, that works because in the society, if I were to tell my boss, hey, I have a meeting for my kid, they'd be like, oh yeah, like most people would be totally fine. I will say they give you often their cell phone numbers, so you can text them if there's like, if a kid is sick or something, but people also know to not like abuse that because everybody kind of wants this work-life balance. But I think like that very hard like line in the sand as far as like, this is when I'm available to work is huge. But then of course, like they're also working within a school system that gives them more prep. Now that doesn't mean that it's easier to be a teacher here in a sense. Some ways it definitely is, but I definitely see still a lot of just like those issues that we have sat and navigated for many years when it comes to student engagement. What are we teaching? How are we teaching kids to be critical thinkers, to be active disruptors? All of those things are definitely playing out here in Denmark too. But I will say that I think this system is set up in a way that it's a little bit easier to kind of go, I'm done. Now I'm going to go spend time with my family. Also because as a society, that's expected. You're expected to be there for your kids. That's your number one priority. And then work comes after that. And that's pretty wild to live in, not going to lie. One of my favorite things about being here. It's been amazing to just be able to be with my kids in a way that I haven't been able to in the US. But man, do I miss a lot of things about the US, especially the people and all of the social justice work that is happening in the US. They are not as far in Denmark as you are in the US. So if you're sitting there going, man, I wish we could be like other educators, just know that the work that American educators and Canadian educators and all of you in international schools, like the social justice lens that you have, is really needed here in Denmark. Anyway, I digress. 9 minutes of digression. It has been wild, and I'm sure I will share more about it. If you have questions about it, please let me know. It's super fascinating. to me as I'm uncovering it too. And then keep your fingers crossed for teaching jobs at some point. So I have some book recommendations as usual because I can't not recommend books. And one of the things that has sucked about living in Denmark is that whenever anyone tries to send me a book and it's not marked as a gift, the Danish customs is like, oh, you need to pay a fee. And usually it's like $30. So it's basically me buying the book and then some. So I have not been receiving a lot of physical copies, which I don't like. I'm such a paper book person, but whatever. I went to NCT and it was so great. I came home with books. So I have a couple books that I just want to recommend. And so you're going to see my beautiful iPad. Because now it gets, I screwed it all up. Hang on one second. I had it all figured out. Okay. So I hope you can see this. It's me showing off. So the book that, oh, now it's getting really bad. Chaos Theory is the new book by Nick Stone, and it comes out this spring. And now I'm on Amazon. I was lucky enough to get a e-copy of it, a review copy. Here's a beautiful cover. This is YA. And I love Nick Stone's work. She has really, really taken incredibly complex topics and brought them in front of kids without dumbing kids down. I think she has a very good, unique lens as far as looking at relationships, and also like not shying away from really complex topics and hard topics that kids are living through. So in Chaos Theory, she's even said, she's like, this is her most personal book so far. It's really about mental health, and you have two incredible teens that are so multifaceted, and one of them, the female character, she is bipolar and has gone through some really big incidents, and she's very cautious now. She's also in a very loving, very, stable, beautiful Black family that takes care of her. But how do you like venture out in the world and trust people when people have really burned you in many ways, and you're also navigating what your brain is telling you to do, which may not always be the right thing to do. So she's like super incredibly complex and so beautiful, and I just loved her as a person. And then she meets a guy, and the guy is also complex. He is a mixed race boy where maybe family life is not the way that you would like it to be. Mom is a prominent politician, and she's running a campaign at the time, and so everything's very rigid as far as what he's supposed to do. And of course, he cannot live up to that. His family's also dealing with the aftermath of his sister dying, and he's an alcoholic. And so these two kind of not collide, but they come together. And how do they navigate being in a relationship when both of them have so many things going on in their lives? And also, how do they navigate themselves and trusting themselves enough to be in a friendship and possibly more? So it's just like this gorgeous story of mental health and complexities and finding yourself and loving yourself, and then getting to a place where you can love other people. So I loved Chaos Theory. It's definitely YA, just because it has more complex topics, obviously, which I think you can hear from my recommendation. My iPad is going totally insane. So the next one that I wanted to do, oh my gosh, I'm obsessed with this book. I actually just cannot even tell you how obsessed I am with this book. Oh my gosh. Google is just going crazy. Anyway, I'm just going to show it. It's a work in progress by Jared Lerner. It's coming out this spring, and I want to say it's May or April, and it's incredible. First of all, it's free verse, so novel and verse. It's middle grade, so a little bit older than middle grade maybe, but like a fourth grader could read it, a seventh grader could read it, an 11th grader could read it, an adult could read it. It's one of those books, but it's also illustrated. So it has illustrations throughout. And it's about a boy and the one moment that changes his whole trajectory and changes his whole self-image and how he sees himself and the space that he takes. And so if you've read the book Starfish by Lisa Phipps, this is that book, but for boys. And as a mom of a boy, I don't see a lot of these books of talking about self-image and the space that boys take up, and what it means to be a boy, and what it means to be a man, and how you're supposed to look. And in the story, we have our main character, and he starts us out in fourth grade, the moment that he realizes that in other people's eyes, he's fat and that fat is something negative according to other people and according to the world, and how he completely changes his whole life because of this moment. It's a story of redemption, of finding yourself without giving up who you are. And I love the journey that the character's on. I love how side characters are used as a way to kind of develop his journey. And I just think it's one of those books that we've needed for so long, and it's finally here. And I'm so, so excited to see it in the hands of kids, because I just think so many kids, because like typically boys don't get to see themselves represented in that way, right? Like we think about how boys are represented in literature, and it's so rigid, and it's so like, be a man, and like very, very like toxic masculinity in some ways. And I just feel like this book blows that up. And it's just so needed. And I'm so glad it's in the world, because I certainly have had these conversations with students throughout the years. And I think it's also a good book for girls to read, right? Or any gender. I think it's just a great book. It's one of my favorite books that I've read here in 2022, even though it's technically a 2023 book, but I would absolutely pre-order it. It is, I think there are some e-arcs, some advanced review e-copies floating around if you check your usual places. The final one that I wanted to also highlight is from my friend Tori, and it's Tori Maldonado. And here's my like crappy picture of it. Everything is not going my way. It's Hands. It's his newest book, and it comes out here shortly. I want to say it's in February. And Hands, Tori just has this incredible way of storytelling and taking very complex topics and putting them in front of kids in less than 150 pages. And this time he talks about the strength of our hands. And we have a main character who's, it starts with the arrest of his stepfather for hitting his mom, and how he goes into boxing because he wants to be able to protect his mom when his stepdad is released from prison. And then it talks about all of the male role models that surround him and the community that surrounds him, and what his path is supposed to be according to all of these different role models. But then also the power that's is in his hands and what he chooses to do with that. It's an absolutely incredible book. Probably middle grade, middle school and up, but I think it would just be such a great book to for kids to discuss. Again, when we talk about representation and what we've seen, I think about I've taught a lot of angry boys. I've taught a lot of angry students in general. And I get often where that anger comes from. And so having a book like this that talks about that anger and using it for something other than destruction, and also showing a main character who doesn't see a clear path, who thinks that they're on a good path, but it's not that they then like go down the wrong path. It's just that they start to realize what that path entails and what they can be instead. And the way that the neighborhood, the father figures and the uncles in the neighborhood show up and guide this young man is really, really beautiful, and just is such a needed love letter to all of those different male figures that can be in a child's life, even if like their biological father is not there. So those are my three recommendations. Sorry, this is taking way longer than I thought, but those books are so incredible. So I promised that I would go into a little bit of work in regard to my mock Caldecott unit, which I shared today. And so if you haven't had a chance to see it, the resources are there for you. There's slides for you. There's the student packet. But here's why I've loved them, because I know some people might be like, why would I do mock Caldecott, particularly with older students? And while I certainly started the unit, many years ago, 8 years ago, as more of a let's have a celebration and here's a way to do it, as the years progressed, I really saw the power of it. So first of all, once again, it's wrapped up in an inquiry question, because every single unit that I do in a year has an inquiry question attached to it. And the reason that I do it that way is that it allows us then to have a broader scope than just like the unit itself that we're doing. So the inquiry question for the mock Caldecott unit has been, how do we persuade? Because that question allows us to dive into ethos, pathos, logos, advertising, bias, fear, emotional, like what emotions sell. We then talk about like, how do you know if something is really real? Like, how do people make you believe that something is accurate? So that of course is perception and assumptions and like all sorts of crazy stuff. That means that this little unit that's really just 2 weeks of loving picture books and reading lots of picture books, all of a sudden expands us to, again, get a broader lens of what's happening in the world. And that's why I love, love, love inquiry, because it really allows us to step back and go, okay, what else can I include in this unit for it to be more than what it is. So if you look at my year plan, you can see kind of the inquiry questions we play around with, but I will tell you this, they change. Some of them change every year. They definitely get fine-tuned. For example, the unit that I would be doing currently and that I know my colleague Chris is doing right now, because he and I have been talking about it, is our dystopian unit. And the inquiry question for that one is, how do we phrase it? It's something like, how much is America dystopia, or is America, or has it been a dystopia? And it's fascinating to see the kids glob onto that, and I have more about that in the dystopian unit. But so here for the mock Caldecott unit, first of all, it's a fantastic unit to use with kids if you're coming back after break. So I love using it in January when kids roll into the new year and they're kind of like, wait a minute, we've still got like 6 months to go or longer, depending on what type of school year you have. Obviously, if you're sitting in the Southern Hemisphere, then you're sitting with brand new kids, and you might not think it's a perfect time, but you can also do it regionally. Obviously, this is geared more towards the US, but I was just sitting and thinking about the Danish Book Awards that happen, and I would love to do it with some of that. But it's a great way also then to start to think critically. And so because art form, and the art form is what is being evaluated, it's a really great unit for getting kids to distinguish between text and art. When we think about visual literacy, which is really one of the biggest ways that we read the world, so think about all your social media, think about emojis, think about all the different ways we communicate that have a visual elements to it, art, etc. Then this is such a perfect unit. How do we read the visual aspect of things and really kind of remove the words in order to critically think about the art? That's why I love my Caldecott unit, because it opens up a whole new world of appreciation for students. Because of course, as we get older, and I do this all the time, what we often see is that when kids and adults read anything with pictures, i.e. graphic novels, picture books, even text messages, we skim very quickly. We don't take the time to slow down and read the images. And so this unit has to, kids have to slow down. So I introduced it very, briefly, explain like what the Caldecott is. I have as many previous honors and winners up in my classroom. This is a great way to coordinate with your librarian, with your public school librarian, with colleagues, who has books that we can put on display. It's super fascinating too, to see like how the representation within Caldecott has changed through the years. So that's a really cool visual. And then we talk about what the awards mean. Why are they important? And kids pretty quickly figure out like, wow, if they win the Caldecott, that means their book stays in print. Yes, exactly. There are some books otherwise we would definitely not still have around, but because they won the Caldecott, they're still in print now. So it's kind of like this quest towards immortality. We, of course, go through the rules, which are written in very adult language. We break them down. And then I read a lot of previous year's winners, and I get them to start thinking about the different art forms. But what I also love is that we sit in community and read picture books together. So leading up to the unit, I will often use, or have already used through the year, the choices for this year. And it is hard to choose. So if you don't know anything about the Caldecott, they don't come out with a list of finalists. It just has to fulfill the criteria. And so I actually set a cross from a member who's on the Caldecott committee this year. And of course, they were not allowed at all to say anything about it, but I could ask some like broad questions. And one of my questions was, do publishers send you every single picture book that is eligible? And the person was like, no, some publishers do, and others kind of send you almost like their Oscar picks. Here you go. And they were talking about how they have like a Caldecott room and nobody's allowed in there, and like it was super fascinating. But of course they couldn't get anything away, nothing, and they totally didn't. They were so good. Oh my gosh, I would have had the hardest time because I am so biased towards some of the books I chose. So for me, every year it's always really, really hard to pick the 12 that I want my students to settle into. More than that, and the unit takes too long and kids kind of zone out. And so I always publish my own list, but I also look at other people's predictions through the year as a book comes across my hands, which of course is harder now. Now I rely a lot on ebooks. I'll make notes of just like, oh my gosh, the art style in this one is incredible. And then of course I have to double check that they actually fit the criteria, because sometimes such as Jarvis, who's an incredible author and illustrator. He's British. And so like his book that came out this year, The Boy with Flowers in His Hair, is not eligible for Caldecott because they have to be in North America. Right, in America, not just North America. So I will then often have used these picture books with kids before, but really it's a way for them to sit, and they usually read 2 or 3 picture books. It's incredible to hear how they fight for their picture books, what they're figuring out, what understand that are used, then like how they rank them. And of course their rankings change. So they do in the packet that I shared with all of you, they give them points, but then they go back too and they start kind of going, yeah, we gave that one 15 points, but really now compared to this book, we would give it 13, blah, blah, blah. And they start to have very specific favorites. But once they've then read them all, at the same time, they're also working, or towards the end of the unit, they're working on a persuasive speech. And that's why we're learning about how to persuade, because their job is then to try to go up and convince the rest of the class that they, of course, picked the best winner and that everybody should vote for that book too. And so we talk a lot about the different ways that they can persuade: ethos, pathos, logos, for example. Are you going to appeal to someone's emotions? Are you going to come up and find quotes? Are you going to find hard data to push your opinion? What's going to happen to people if they don't vote for your book, etc.? And it is brilliant to see 7th graders run with this. And so, but also younger students, right? Like I've just happened to have been doing it with 7th graders for a really long time because that's what I taught for so many years. I love how they can utilize these tools that we're diving into and that they're learning more about, because it also makes them more critical of their own media consumption, right? When kids can see, oh, you're using ethos right now, okay, then they can also maybe, if it's in the back of their head at some point when they're sitting and scrolling through TikTok or listening to the news, and go like, oh, I see what they did there. I see how they tried to persuade me. I see which tangents it's hitting on. And that's why I love this unit. So it's not only like, are we getting to sit and read incredible picture books? Oh my gosh. Every year I'm like, this list is so amazing. And every year the winners and the honors that they pick, it's just, they're so incredible. But it's also this idea of like, we're giving them visual literacy tools to read the world. And I just think that that's so important, all within 2 weeks. And so if you haven't done a mock Caldecott unit, please, please, please take inspiration from mine. I know I learned a lot from other people who did it. I'm so grateful for all of the people who share their lists. And reach out if you have any questions. We culminated with watching the actual awards. And so this year they're January 30th. And I usually show them the day after, because otherwise, like, depending on my schedule, some classes saw it live, then others saw the recording, some missed part of it. Like, it just got a little wonky. Now, that does mean that some kids already know, because some of them are so excited that they look it up, which I think is great. And I just say, don't give it away. But they have voted and they have their favorites, and there's always like rewards involved, whatever. We figure something out as far as just like the kudos, of course, of like having picked the year's winner. Last year I had one group pick watercress, and they were out of their minds when it did win. In 2020, or a large majority of my kids had picked undefeated. So when it was called, it was like, wow, they were all so excited, which is so cool for 7th graders, like being excited about picture books. So I've shared the unit with you. I came up with my 12 plus 4 today and put them up for you, but that doesn't mean that you need to just listen to me. That's like my gut feeling. Trust me, sometimes I am so wrong. I will say, for the most part, the last 6 years, the one that I have chosen as my winner has been either the winner or an honors book. So I feel like I at least have some bases covered. And Caldecott committee, I would love to be on that committee, even though it'd be so hard. And I probably can't, since I'm sitting in Denmark now. But so again, thinking about inquiry, because I wanted to just take a moment to think about that too. I started framing all of my units through an inquiry lens, probably, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. I don't know, everything gets a little blurry because of COVID, a while ago. And it started with just select units where I was like, gosh, I wish there was a way that I could bring in more video, more mentor text, broader discussion that just goes beyond what we're doing. And having an inquiry question really framed us. So for example, I mentioned the dystopian unit previously in this recording or in this live stream. One of the ways that this idea of, has America or is it a dystopia, it it makes me go, okay, what is stuff that I can expose my students to so that they can develop their own critical thinking? And so one of the ways that we chose to use this question was then to expose them to a lot of history that they may have missed or that typically isn't taught broadly in school. And so we talk a lot about access, who has access to what power, because we talk a lot about power and positionality anyway throughout the year, which may seem like, oh my gosh, how are you doing that with 12-year-olds? You would be like, do it. You would be just, kids have so much to say, blown away by their responses. And even kids who are like, what do you mean power? And you invite them into that conversation. Younger kids can have these conversations too. I have them with my own kids. It's really, really eye-opening. But it allowed us to kind of go through and go, okay, what are maybe historical moments and also current things that kids are not even aware of? But I will then say, once we do a unit like that, we then go into the Caldecott unit, which is a little bit lighter. And I think that that's also important when we're planning out a year, right? Is in thinking of, it can't all be heavy, because we already have kids that are struggling with mental health that already are kind of looking out at the world and going, what's my future going to look like? With, inflation and with COVID and with racism and with like all of these things that are going on, right? Book banning, like all the crazy stuff. And so if we're constantly saying, let's do heavy topics, let's do heavy topics, I worry about mental health. And so there's like a fine line in inquiry. So try some inquiry questions and kind of make it broader than your unit. So if you're doing a unit, for example, like when I do a read aloud unit, of course, we're sitting and doing review of different reading skills and reading strategies and how do we go into more complex discussion. But we also have an inquiry question that takes us beyond that offers us up opportunities to research, offers us up opportunities to have lots of discussions, and offers us opportunities to just ask questions about the world. And so this theme that I have all year has to do with power and positionality. I really want my kids to think about, or my students to think about, who holds the power in any given situation? How do people act in accordance to that power? And how does that impact us as human beings? Like, whose voices are missing? Whose perspectives are not being seen? And so we weave that in throughout the year. But it also is a great way to do cross-collaborative work within your classroom. So we would sometimes work with geography, for example, and have some broader things that they were working on in geography that they could then also use in English. And so thinking about inquiry questions is something that I'm really, really excited about, and I want to write more about, because I know it's kind of rambly, and when I don't have slides to lay it out for you, I apologize. I know it's just me talking at you, but you can definitely see the inquiry questions that I've used previously. I'm super pumped to get back into a classroom over here and to try it over here with Danish kids, because there's a lot of just like discussion in Danish classrooms anyway, and so to frame it in this way. Inquiry question can also means that you have to make space for discussions. And so, for example, in our dystopian unit, we started out with kind of like a beginning discussion. Well, and before that discussion, we would always do a self-reflection. I think it's really important that kids sit and have time to come up with their own thoughts without feeling like others are taking their thoughts. And then before we would kind of open up to smaller group discussion, I did just a contingency line, so 0 to 100%, and I had kids just put Post-it notes with their names on it on where they feel like America was on that line. 100% was like full dystopia, 0 was like obviously not at all. And then in a small group, in their book club group, they would talk about like why they put their Post-it where they did. And then we would open it up to broad conversation. And that was probably some of my most favorite discussions. Now, we did that then later in the unit as well. And we would kind of stop and have them think about it and have them discuss. And then at the end of the unit, this was also how we wrapped up the unit. How did your understanding of America change? And it was fascinating because some kids were like, I felt this way and I still feel this way. And others had like changed broadly in either direction, right? And then we talked a lot about like, what is new knowledge that you carry from this unit beyond all of the literary skills. This is why I love inquiry, because of course we're sitting and also learning like, how do you track characters? Who holds the power? How do you have a book club discussion? How do you figure out setting? Like all of those skills of like diving into, also sitting here and going, okay, if we think America is a dystopia, for whom? What can we do as active citizens? If we don't think, why not? And how can we maintain that? How can we keep that hope alive and protect this vision that we have of America? I loved it so much, and I miss terribly not being able to do it with kids. So I'm here for you, and I am a resource that you can tap into. I would love to collaborate with you if you're sitting and needing book lists, if you're sitting and trying to figure out a unit, if you're like, I want to jump into this inquiry stuff, help me out. I'm here. I have a lot of flexibility in my schedule, and I'm dying to work with educators because I miss you all. I miss being in the classroom. I miss my collegial conversations and sitting down and lesson planning and doing all of those. That's what this Patreon is for. So please, please, please reach out, seriously. And then I hope to, if you get to have kind of a winter or summer break, depending on where you are in the world, I hope that you rest. I didn't realize how badly I needed to step away until I stepped away. And that's still figuring out the guilt and the confusion of not being actively like a teacher in a classroom. I'm still a teacher, but without a classroom, Alan told me. And it's been a lot of unraveling and a lot of bad habits to break, as far as constantly feeling like I should be on and should be creating. So I'm here to alleviate some of that for you. So if there's resources I can give you, ideas I can share with you, but more so also collaboration questions. There's no question that's silly. If I have any experience, I'll help you. If not, I'll point you to people who have. I can be someone that hopefully lightens the load for you, because you're carrying a lot, many of you, and just know you have someone to share that with. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it wasn't too weird. I feel very rusty being out of these, and I miss having slides. Slides makes everything easier. So let me know in the comments if you have questions, if there's resources you would like me to share, and just take care. And I will, of course, see you in 2023. I can't wait.